going to be taking some notes. These notes will focus on the transition from Era 2 into Era 3. You can find the notes posted on the Google Classroom underneath the Classroom tab. They're labeled Notes 3.8. When you open up the slide presentation, you'll see that you'll be starting with a map, and then you'll follow along with the red text boxes. Make sure there are a couple directions in the text box that is outlined in black. Make sure that you read those directions carefully and ask for help if you need it. You'll see that on both slide 2, 3, and on slide 6. So make sure that you read those directions very carefully. We're going to go ahead and get started. Feel free to pause at any point to write down any of the important information. You also should feel free to re-listen to any part of this presentation if you need clarification. Okay, so this unit does focus on the rise of empires, and this will be slightly different from what we've previously been talking about. Here's my joke for today. You can come up with the movie that this is referencing and send it to me. I'll give you an extra credit point. But Octavian stopped trying to make this empire happen. It's not going to happen. So again, Era 3 is going to look very different from Era 2. When we ended our last unit in Era 2, we were looking at the ancient river valley civilizations that began to grow and expand during this time period. So I wanted you to spend a little time thinking about what actually allowed these civilizations to grow. Again, think about some of the things that we discussed last unit, like geographic luck and cultural diffusion, as well as their trade and the interconnectedness that we started to see at the end of Era 2. So make sure that you write down a couple of those things that you remember from last unit that help these civilizations to grow. One example that I came up with for what allowed them to grow and form agricultural villages was Katahayuk, and the things that allow them to transition in this civilization include geographic luck, meaning access to plants and animals that can be domesticated, temperate climate, meaning you have enough sunny days for your plants, but you also have enough rainy days to water your plants. We also see the population growth, meaning you have enough people to populate a village. We talked about this as we talked about large cities growing as centers of power. And then the ability to communicate and learn from each other. We talked about the first form of writing using cuneiform in Mesopotamia and hieroglyphics in Egypt. We also talked about how we learn from one another using cultural diffusion, which helped different technologies to spread, as well as ideas about society, like how a government should run. And again, the example that I provided is Katahayuk, the oldest known civilization that historians and archaeologists have been able to find. They are a good example of these things as they had a good amount of geographic luck, meaning that they were able to transition out of a foraging community to a farming community due to their access to several types of grains and climate. This information you should copy down into your chart that looks similar to this on slide 2. This style of note-taking, the argument formation note tracker, we will be using throughout this unit. So if you have any questions on this format, our answer to the driving question, the examples of ideas and concepts that we talked about in class, and then a piece of evidence to support our opinion over here. please let me know so I can go over it with you, as again, we will be using this format throughout this unit, and we'll go more in depth specifically for this unit on Thursday. From Era 2 to Era 3, we're going to see several things shift. What makes Era 3 different from Era 2 is the way that human society is organized and interacted. In Era 2, many, but not all, people began to live in civilizations. We talked about the people that both lived in civilizations and the nomadic groups that lived outside of civilizations. We'll also see the formation of city-states, one of the first organized forms of societies with rules, norms, and social institutions. This should be reviewed, but again, a city-state is a city that has its own power structure and identity and is not controlled by a larger body like a country. The city-state that you guys will probably be the most familiar with is Babylonia in Mesopotamia. They have their large city at the center of Babylon. This was the seat of power where the monarchs lived. The monarch that you guys again will be most familiar with is Hammurabi. It has its own identity. It has its own social structure or social hierarchy. We see them interacting differently with groups within its society, across different farming societies, and between pastoral nomads. We also see that they have their own laws, that they will control themselves. In Era 3, however, many people will still be living in civilizations, but something is going to change. It's important to remember that eras are chunks of time that are grouped together based on patterns that we see. So Era 2, the main pattern is going to be people living in smaller farming societies with a monarch at the center of power, making the decisions, a rigid social hierarchy where people could not change their circumstances. We have trade and cultural diffusion as technology develops. Large cities begin to grow, and then different interactions with pastoral nomads. This unit will focus on the changes in Era 3 and how that will need for them to become empires. So again, Era 2 are small river valley civilizations: Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus and the Ganges River Valley, and what will become India, and the Yellow and the Yangtze River, and what will become China. And as we transition into Era 3, you will see a big difference. We see larger empires covering territory across multiple continents. We see new names for these regions as different people take power. We also see trade routes being represented on this map. Trade will become essential to these empires during Era 3 and will become so important that they must be represented on this map. We also see many new technologies and resources being traded: tin, copper, gold, olive oil, wine, pottery, iron, amber. Slaves will begin being traded, linen, myrrh, horses, muslin, gems, ivory, pepper, pearls, spices, perfume, tortoiseshells, and most importantly, silk. We also see the emergence of strong nomadic groups. The Huns, who you might have heard of from our crash course videos, or if you've watched the movie Mulan, the group that was trying to invade China. We'll learn more about them later in this unit. You also have the Spartans and the Germanic tribes as well. So those pastoral nomadic groups are represented on this map as well, which is a change from Era 2. So make sure that you look carefully at these two maps in your notes to write down at least 3 differences. Again, the shift from Era 2 to Era 3 was an important turning point in history as these agricultural civilizations changed and became empires. Again, our driving question for this unit is, what does it take to become an empire? How were they able to do this? And the last part of your notes today is asking you to brainstorm. What do you already know about empires? Thinking specifically, what is an empire? How would a civilization change into an empire? And how is an empire different than a civilization? So in the middle section of your chart, you'd need to write down one component that you think it needs to have to be an empire. So for example, you might say it needs to be large in size. And then the third column on the right side is asking you to provide an example. So you might provide an example from the map that we just looked at. The Roman Empire will become the largest empire that we'll be talking about. So you could use that as your example. I'd like for you to come up with 2. If the only way that you know empire is from Star Wars, that's fine. I just want you to start brainstorming and thinking about where you might have heard the word empire and begin to develop your understanding of the word. And once you have listed those 2 things, you are done with your notes for today. If you need to rewatch or re-listen to any part of this video, feel free to do so. Again, make sure that you pay special attention to the directions in the black text boxes and reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.